what I saw, I in a lot of games, not just last night, was, in my opinion, still a need for somebody in the middle, still a need for a center. Grange, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, they certainly don't want to go down the road of what you and I would have thought a center was 10 or 15 years ago and
Yeah,
give somebody a bunch of post ups and all that kind of stuff. But the reason they drafted Christian Coloco was they kind of acknowledge you need someone who can protect the rim situationally. You need somebody, I think, offensively who can roll to the rim off in a high screen and be a threat to finish on a lob, and that kind of opens up your corners for threes and things like that. And Coloco might get there. I'm not going to say he can't, but he's not there yet. And I kind of agree with you. I think if you were to look at one simple addition on this team, not that adding it would be simple, a legitimate big who can kind of do what they will hope Coloco can do one day, but could do it now.
yeah.
Would be an easy improvement. It would be an easy improvement. I don't think solves all their problems, but it would certainly fill a hole that needs filling, to my mind.
Hey,
Dougie,
Doug,
is that
how
even?
close are?
Go ahead, John.
No, I was just saying, Dave, how close are they to? I don't think anybody's ever 100% after the first 20 games, but how close to 100% health is this team?
They're missing two key guys in Achua and Otto Porter. And like Mike said, I think Coloco is basically a placeholder for Achua until he gets through this ankle thing and gets back to be able to play. And then I think you'll see Coloco spend a lot of February, March in the G League, playing 38. They're playing 38 minutes a night, which he should be doing. And you let Achua, Boucher, Thad Young, Kem Birch a little bit play that center spot. And Porter gives them the shooter they don't have. I know Bob. Last night they didn't have, the inside presence wasn't there, but the Lakers don't have it either. But the Raptors still don't have enough shooting. And I don't care what anybody says, they're not good enough shooters. And they got to get a floor spacer. And maybe Porter's that guy, or maybe you turn draft picks and Gary Trent and Malachi Flynn into one in February, because they just do not have enough consistent three-point shooting.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Porter is supposed to be that guy, though.
A 40% career shooter, so yeah, you think so. But he's also played 60 games a year for like 3 years in a row.
I think he's played 60 games a year total. Last year was the big exception, right? But the 3 years before that, I think literally it was 60 games. And I think coming in there, they knew keeping him healthy. I mean, the guy's the oldest 29-year-old in pro sports
ever.
He's younger than Chris Boucher, which is amazing. But I mean, hopefully, between the hamstring and this toe, he can give him 20, 25 minutes a night. And, at that point, like to your point, John, is if you do have Achua as something close to a rim rolling big and, and Otto Porter being one of the guys who can spot up in a corner and keep the floor spread that way, we'll have a little better read on what these guys can do.
What's the plan? How long till Porter's ready? Do you know?
There's no indication, but a couple of weeks at least, probably, to dislocated toe, coming off the hamstring. He's not in shape, obviously, so he's going to take 2 weeks once he gets back practicing to be fully ready. So you're probably looking at 3 weeks from now,
minimum.
Wow.
And you put him in this? Do you put him in the starting lineup because he hasn't played? He hasn't been a starter.
No, you bring him off the bench and let him shoot, and that's the deal. You start, in my mind, you start Van Vliet, Barnes, Anunoby, Siakam, and Achua. That's your best five guys. That's your best starting lineup, in my opinion. I don't think there's room for Gary Trent, and I don't think there's room for Christian Coloco.
I don't disagree, but the interesting thing is then you've got Trent and Porter coming off the bench, and they're your two, I suppose, best three-point shooters. They are your three-point shooters, really, essentially. And there's only one basketball. How does that work?
Maybe you hope that Trent can do what they need him to do, which is a little bit more. Like the one thing Gary Trent is not is a catch and shoot threat. Every three-pointer he takes is off a couple of dribbles. So maybe you get him doing something with the ball, and he still has the possibility of being a good defender. His defensive game has dropped off precipitously this year from last, but maybe he morphs into that 6-man who's the energy backcourt guy, like Boucher is energy front court guy. But that's asking a lot. I still think the trade chip is Gary Trent in February, and I think that's basically a league-wide expectation that they'll look to move him for something in February.
What can you get? You're not going to get a center.
No, you put him in a package. He's got bird rights coming out. He's going to be a free agent in the summer because he'll opt out of his deal. Team that gets his bird rights. It's akin to what they did with Norm Powell when they traded him in the Tampa tank year for a guy who's not as good as Norm Powell, but a guy who might have had some more promise, and they weren't going to pay Norm. They're not going to pay Gary Trent. So you see what you can do in February. Maybe you can't do anything, but I think that's the guy you're going to shop around.
But then that leaves you, if you trade Trent, that leaves you with Porter as your 3-pointer, a guy who knows, may play 10 games this year.
Or you get somebody back.
I guess.
That's the thing.
And we're discounting Van Vliet as a 3-point shooter?
Mike?
Well, the premise would be, and I agree with what Doug's saying, but I mean, I think between now and the trade deadline, let's presume Porter, there's probably maybe a 6-week window when Porter is back and he's healthy. Maybe you bring both of them off the bench, Porter and Trent Jr. Maybe you start Porter, although you got to manage his minutes because you can't roll him out there for 30, 35. So, that's why bringing him off the bench makes it a little easier. I think, down the stretch of games, as much as everyone wants a big, and I would certainly sign off on that, most times, you're looking, it's not all that often you do have a true big in your closing lineups. So maybe you end up with Porter in a lineup with Gary Trent Jr. if he's shown he's playing that night. And I think with the problem you have right now is, you do want to have some shooting on the floor. You by default, you end up going to Gary Trent, even, when he is struggling and slumping, he's playing better now. So Porter Jr. gives you an extra option. But, I agree exactly with Doug's saying. I think, I'm not saying the Raptors wouldn't pay Gary Trent Jr. I just don't think they would pay him what Gary Trent Jr., Rich Paul, hope, wish he could get, which, he's seeing guys like Tyler Hero and Jordan, and others of that ilk, kind of one-dimensional scoring wings or small wings, getting $100+ million. And so I can promise you that, like, the Raptors aren't going to go 6 figures, or what is that, 8 figures? How many figures is that, Bob? You might know.
It's a lot of figures. More figures than we make.
A lot more figures than I got. But they're not going to go to that way. So I think the scenarios are, they're happy to, they want to get Porter Jr. and Trent Jr. healthy on the floor, see what they got. I think if they can upgrade, I think from an asset management point of view, you do look seriously at moving Trent Jr. at the deadline. And to Doug's point, you kind of look at trades as you were looking at a year ago, right? So Doug McDermott is a really good shooter who's, kind of a bit of a doesn't really fit the timeline in San Antonio. That's one name that comes up. You got Eric Gordon in Houston, kind of same idea. And you got to keep in mind, though, the rest of the league's thinking the exact same stuff. So, you got to question what you're willing to put into a deal if there's competition on names like that. And if the worst, not the worst, but there is a scenario that plays out where you don't move them, you keep your assets, you keep your draft picks, and Gary Trent Jr. goes out, and like a lot of other Raptors free agents the last bunch of years, have kind of got out to the market and go, wait a second, there's not a fountain of money out here waiting for fairly average NBA players.